Welcome back. I'm that chemist, and today we're going to talk about 31 signs that indicate that you might have a bad boss. Now, for a little bit of added fun today, I've actually made a bingo card that you can go into the description and click on. And as we're going through this, you can fill out your bingo card and see if your boss is going to give you a bingo. So I'll make a new channel in the Discord specifically for your bingo card results, and if you want to share them and discuss them there, that would be really fun. So without further ado, let's get started. One of the first signs that you could see that would definitely indicate that your boss might be a bad boss is that they don't regularly visit the workplace. An example of this would be that you only correspond with them by email and you rarely see them in person. Another example would be that they don't provide the regular input that you require and they don't check up on you. They just kind of leave you to your own devices and you have to figure out stuff on your own. They just seem ambivalent regarding the progress, your projects or tasks, and it's just like not what you want from a good boss. Another one would be that they just justify their poor supervision instead of accepting responsibility and committing to improve their own practices. And so if you ever bring stuff up that's like, hey, these are some issues, we should really like try and work through them, and they just try and defend themselves instead of trying to like get better, that's like concerning. In a good leader, you want to see the ability for them to admit that they're wrong or imperfect and that they're trying to get better. One example would be you bring up an issue and they say, you should be grateful that I'm not worse. These things might be bad, but my supervisor is way worse. I'm an angel compared to them. And it's just not helpful. The fourth sign is that they refuse to learn how to use technology or develop new skills. So one thing that's like good example of this is that they keep doing stuff on paper, even though these things can easily be done digitally. Or maybe there's a new system that your business has been implementing and they've just refused to switch over to the new one. You need to move on and adapt to new systems. Another sign is that they might micromanage their workers and interrupt their day so that they can feel like they're in charge of that person. They're just going to constantly interrupt you and prevent you from being able to do your workflow. Another thing would be is like that they openly mock a coworker or instead of encouraging them. So let's say someone makes some sort of mistake and they come to their boss and they say, "Hey, I did this," and instead of helping them or trying to talk through what went wrong, the boss might just like rip them up in front of everyone and make fun of them and make an example out of them instead of actually trying to help. And that's not good. Another sign that you'd have a bad boss is that they are too positive. They tell you everything will work and everything will be hunky dory every time, all the time. Everything will go exactly according to plan. It'll be easy. You won't run into any issues. You won't even need any help on this. You're so capable. You're going to be able to do this all by yourself. And if you have a boss like that all the time, it can be really toxic. Another sign is that they consistently predict unrealistic deadlines. So they'll tell you something might take an hour, but it actually takes you a whole day. Or they might tell you something will be done next week, but it might take months. And when this happens over and over, you start questioning whether you're flawed, whether you're the problem. But more often than not, your boss might just be overhyping things and might be telling you you can do things in a much shorter amount of time than you can actually do. Now, another sign is that they will fight about expenses and try to make their workers pay out of pocket. So let's say you bought coffee for the office, you're trying to submit a reimbursement request, and they just decide, like, oh, sorry, we can't really afford to do that. And I don't know if it's necessarily like a power thing or if it's poor financial management, but it's not acceptable that your coworkers or that your employees are paying for something and that you're unwilling to reimburse them. Like, there are times when, yes, employees might come and do something out of the good of their heart, but if there's some reasonable expectation, like you're buying the office coffee, it's pretty reasonable that reimbursement could occur. Now, another thing that supervisors do that's not cool to their workers is make them work unacceptably long hours or, several long shifts in a row. Another really big one is unpaid overtime, which is not fair at all, and it's very common in a research context. You need to do this. Everyone's relying on you. Everyone else has already gone home. I might have to let you go if you don't do this. And they really just exploit their workers this way. So the 11th sign is that they lack a big picture about what's going on. So a good leader will have a sense of everything that's going on in terms of a project, in terms of an organization, a broader scheme of things. And oftentimes, if your supervisor or boss doesn't have a good sense of this, they won't be able to tell you what to do next or what problems to work on next. And so that can prevent you from being efficient and it can be really harmful to the whole organization. Other times it might be like, there's no solution to this problem, so we need to create a new solution. But you bring up, hey, but there's a solution right here. And they'll just be like, are you questioning me? And it's just not a good thing. So sign number 12 is that they'll express a lack of concern regarding your safety. And so you might say, I'm afraid to do something this way. I just don't think that this is very safe. And they might say, oh yeah, just go ahead, do that. It's just fine. Just be careful. And then let's say it goes wrong exactly how you'd raised a concern about, they might be like, oh, you should have known better than doing that. This is on you. And when a boss does that, it's so frustrating because it's just really bad leadership and it totally dissolves your confidence in them. So sign 13 is that they'll demonstrate inappropriate or unprofessional personal conduct. And so sometimes this is like using inappropriate language in the workplace, referring to groups of people using outdated language, or sometimes it's just being a terrible human being. Another one is that they lack sufficient competence or experience to supervise you. Sometimes people get into these positions because of nepotism or cronyism. Some friend or family's hired them. Other times they're just trying to do a project that's too far out of their expertise. And sometimes this can be an example of micromanagement as well. And so sometimes they just can't provide support to you because they have no idea what they're talking about. And sometimes the worst case is when they think that they're competent, but they're not, because you'll go to them for advice and they'll give you bad advice. And that's one of the worst things to get from a boss. So another sign is that they don't lead by example. They expect you to work long hours while they relax. They get to go home early, but you have to work longer. Sign 16 is that they're not approachable. You want to come to them with a problem, you have something to bring up, and they just dismiss you or they avoid discussing the issue. They're just being a coward. It's not good. Sometimes they'll make themselves not approachable by having their door closed, having their door locked. Those are kind of more like micro expressions of not being approachable. And, your body language and your attitude that you like emulate to everyone is important because it should be a reflection of how you want to be treated and how you want to appear, right? Not superficial. Sign 17 is that they care more about the appearance of the workplace than how effective the work is being done. They're just superficial. And so maybe your workplace has a visit from higher up and they want you to make sure that everything looks clean and looks efficient, but they don't actually care about what you get done. And while that might be like nice because then you don't have to work as hard that day, if you really care about the quality of work that's being done, which you should, it can be really, heartbreaking because you know that they are superficial and their values are a reflection of their values as a person. And that can be really hurtful for their reputation and it makes you not want to work for someone like that. That's kind of like a common theme with all of these. If your boss has these, you don't want to work for someone like that. And oftentimes it can be really challenging to bring this up to HR. Okay, another issue is when they have poor communication skills. And so maybe you have concerns, but they just don't acknowledge them. Or they will be involved in some email chain and they'll just really reflect poorly on you. And quite often you can become more competent than your boss in certain areas, but you can't really do anything about it because they're in a higher position and you're stuck. There's some sort of glass ceiling. So sign 19 is that they are unable to compartmentalize their home life from their work obligations. So they're the boss, they're a manager, they're supervising. That means that they have to manage and they have to supervise. And oftentimes, if they plan better, they can get around some of their home responsibilities. And so one thing that can happen is a family thing can come up and they can neglect their responsibility as a supervisor. And then what are you supposed to do if you don't have the guidance you need? So there are definitely cases where family stuff happens and you need to go and deal with it. But a lot of the time, if you plan appropriately, you can avoid these sorts of issues as a supervisor. Now, as a worker, there's less of a burden on you. Like if you have a family member that needs a thing coming up, whatever, like you can do that sort of stuff a lot more. And, maybe that should also extend to the supervisors. But because they're in a key role, they need to be reliable. And being reliable means that you can rely on them all the time. Okay, sign 20 is that they have poor resource management. And this is bad for you as an employee, but it's also bad for the higher ups because then their department isn't running as effectively as it could be. So quite often what happens is, let's say not enough stuff is ordered in an order. So you're ordering a small amount of stuff several times. You're paying extra for shipping. It's just not a very efficient way to run stuff. And so sometimes they'll also splurge on like high-end hotels, high-end first-class flights. Those types of things can chew into the budget really easily, and it's easy to justify because I'm the executive, I'm the boss, and that hurts the organization as a whole, not just you as an employee. So sign 21 is that they will verbally or physically abuse their workers. Now, I would say physical abuse is much less common, at least in the Western world in my experience, although I do know it still occurs from time to time, but physical abuse can occur a lot depending on what sector you're working in. And this is really toxic as an employee because it's pretty straightforward. It physically or emotionally traumatizes you, and that's bad, right? There we go. Okay, 22 is that they distance themselves from any interpersonal workplace dynamics. You might have an issue with a coworker, you tried resolving it with your coworker, but they don't want to get involved and help. Those are your problems. Sort them out on your own. You come to them with your problem and they don't help. Sign 23 is that they just ignore or foster an environment which creates workplace conflict. So maybe they just add gas to the fire. Let's say your coworkers are picking on another coworker. The boss could de-escalate things, but instead of doing that, they can add to the fire and then further make fun of that person. And then when everyone sees the boss does it and it's okay, that means that they feel more comfortable doing it in the future. And so that's one of the worst things that a boss can do because it sets the tone for the workplace. It's not acceptable. Sign 24 is that they're greedy and that they prioritize their own profit and success over the profit and success of their workers. It's important to remember that when you're in a company, and in general as a human being, you're part of team humanity. You're part of team whatever your company is. And if you want to succeed as a company, everyone needs to succeed. And so you always need to put the priority of the company pretty high up in terms of where you place value. Yes, you need to make your own profit and success matter, but you also need to be thinking about everyone else. Both matter. Sign number 25 is that they just ignore concerns raised by their coworkers or by their workers. And so you bring up an issue and they'll say, I understand that you're worried about it, but you really don't need to worry about that. It's not your responsibility. Sometimes you want to go above and beyond and raise an issue to your boss, be like, hey, I noticed this thing's wrong. I thought I'd bring it up with you because I care about the business, blah, blah, blah. And when a boss dismisses that, that will stop that person from ever telling you what's wrong with your business. And that is super destructive for the company as a whole. Sign 26 is that they can't take criticism and ignore the opinions of their worker. It can be hard to receive negative advice, right? It can be hard to be criticized. But if you're a boss, you want to know what's wrong and you want to be approachable. You always want people to come to you with their problems and be honest with you about your problems. Maybe they're wrong, right? But if there's a good saying. If you're driving to work and there's a guy who's being a tool on the road, maybe there's a guy who's a tool on the road. If you're driving at lunch and there's a tool on the road, yeah, maybe there's a tool on the road at lunch. Maybe if you're driving home, there's a tool on the road. Yeah, maybe there's a tool on the road when you're driving home. But if everywhere you go all day there's tools, maybe you're the tool. Maybe you need to be less of a tool. Okay. So, it can be challenging to be approachable. It's really hard to accept criticism, but being approachable is very respectable. Having humility, having the capacity to be approached is really useful as a boss because then it shows that you're a team player and that you want to become better. And people like that. Sign 27 is that they never challenge your idea even when they know you'll fail. And so they want you to learn the hard way. And occasionally you do need to learn the hard way, but it's not very loving and it's not very compassionate as a boss to want to see your coworkers fail. Sometimes a coworker or a worker employee will be really stubborn and they are going to need to learn the hard way. But if you know that you could prevent their issue by telling them and they would listen if you told them, you should by all means tell them because you can save them the grief and you can save the company the grief, which would be great. Wouldn't it be great if we all had to suffer less? Sign number 28 is that they gaslight their coworker. They manipulate them. They think, I didn't say that. Yes, you did. No, I didn't. I know what I said. And because you're the boss or they're the boss, what can you do, right? You can't fight them. You're not going to fight your boss, right? Because at the end of the day, they could just fire you or they could let you go or they could make your life a living hell. So you need to learn how to act around a boss, and if the boss is gaslighting you, it can be really challenging. Sign 29 is that they just offload their responsibilities onto you, and then you don't get any pay raise, and you have to do more than you're supposed to. This is often tied to unpaid overtime, because suddenly you have more work to do. That means you have to work longer hours, and they're going to go home early, so you have to do even more. You just basically get to do the job of your boss for free, and that's not very cool. Sign 30 is that they'll provide short-term notice for imminent deadlines. They'll be like, oh, by the way, I need this thing tomorrow, or oh, by the way, I need this thing by the end of the day. But they could have told you that sooner, but maybe due to poor planning or lack of conscientiousness, they just didn't tell you. And so an example of this is when you have to call your significant other, sorry, honey, I'm going to have to come home late because I have to do a double shift, or I have to get these TPS reports done, blah, blah, blah. And that can be really frustrating as well. This happens in every sector. Now, the last sign is that they're unresponsive to texts and emails. This is really important, especially as a manager or a supervisor, because you need to be able to supervise. If you're not there, you need to be able to respond quickly, because oftentimes lots of decisions are dependent on what you will say. And so if you don't say, other decisions will be made, and that reflects on you, and you are responsible for that. Even if you say, oh, I wasn't there, so I'm not responsible. It's yeah, correct, you're not responsible because you weren't there. So it can be rough. So there's some other fatal flaws. One of the most common ones is showing favoritism to certain employees, cronyism, nepotism, picking sides. So maybe agreeing with one coworker instead of being a neutral third party. It just isn't very healthy for the workplace. So if you have any other really good fatal flaws that indicate that your boss might be a bad boss, please do comment down below. So if you've enjoyed this video, I'd encourage you to leave a like and subscribe. Again, if you got a bingo, make sure you post your bingo card in the bingo section of the Discord. And I hope you have a great day.